Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, creating your album art for free by employing an intern, or else a scrappy upstart, creating your album art for free with the AI graphic designer Midjourney. This is your show, because ultimately it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the last Friday of March 2023, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Arlo who drove a 1997 Buick Regal with suicide doors, and who was always trying to sell you a rare Pokemon card that was slightly damaged. And old Arlo would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now. You guys, that's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates. This year, Bandzoogle would like to congratulate its members on surpassing $100 million in commission-free sales through their websites. The Working Songwriter Podcast listeners can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live, in the coming weeks you can check out my tour page, joepugmusic.com, where there are a bevy of new tour dates posted all around the country, from Arcata, California to Annapolis, Maryland. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you can become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon, or you search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show, and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the capital to support the show in that way. If you're not in a place where you can support us that way, there's still a couple ways that you could help for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, that's all the harassment I have for you. I hope that you enjoy this week's episode. Our guest this week is an artist who, after years of learning the ropes with his brother, is stepping into the spotlight on his own. Tim Hause spent years playing with Dave Hause, a fixture in both the hardcore and singer-songwriter communities, and also an alumnus of this show. Now, Tim has composed and recorded a record of his own, which he is releasing under the simple moniker of, you guessed it, Tim. He has toured with the likes of The Gaslight Anthem, Will Hoge, and Tall Tall Trees. His compositions have also been featured in TV shows like Billions, Chicago Fire, and Showtime's The Circus. The Rodeo magazine calls him an expert lyricist. I got a chance to catch up with him on the phone a few weeks ago to hear about his musical journey so far. Well, listen, Tim Hause, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. Many of our listeners might be more familiar with you to begin with your work with your brother, Dave Hause, who's an alumnus of our podcast. Can you describe to our listeners a little bit how you got your start in music and how it began with your family?
Yes, absolutely. I was puttering around in college, becoming disillusioned with the whole institution, really. I didn't know what I was studying. I got in there right after high school and was there for a couple years. And I think halfway through my second year, I just was it was kind of coming to a head, like, I don't know if this is for me. And around that same time, Dave and I struggled to actually put the pieces together on how it all started. But Dave was going out on a 10.5 week tour across Canada in the middle of winter, where our first show began in a heatless Asbury Lanes. This is before it was remodeled. And so that was my first foray in was, hey, do you want to, you're not liking college. Do you want to come out on the road with me? You can play along. I'll teach you the ways of the road, and you'll figure out over 10.5 weeks if you like it or not.
I had a very similar experience with you to college. I dropped out after 3 years, but it was a similar disillusionment where it was just, well, I'm not learning something here that's going to help me make money, and I'm taking humanities courses that aren't edifying in any way. It's not like I'm reading great books and getting wisdom on how to live a life well lived. To me, and you can speak for yourself here, but to me, I felt like I was getting like a bunch of like sanitized corporate speak, and I was paying for the pleasure to get it. So I just bailed out very quickly.
Absolutely. And that's kind of, that's how it was for me too. I just didn't. And, if I had a clarity of vision, hey, I want to do this when I get out of here, and these are the steps, I need this degree, and it's going to make this investment back, then I would have probably had a clarity that would have made it really valuable to me, because I've always really loved school. And, but anyway, yeah, it just wasn't, it didn't seem like it was going to have a meaningful, make a meaningful addition from a financial perspective. I just didn't think I would be able to make the money back that I was spending.
Really? It's like I don't need to pay, $12,000 a year to have some boomer professor tell me that Holden Caulfield has an Oedipal complex.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's like, come on, man.
Exactly.
So you bailed and you end up on this tour with your brother. There's a huge disparity in age between your brother Dave and you. Like, he's the oldest in your family, you're the youngest. There's about 15 years in between. So how well, I mean, obviously he was your brother, so you knew him, but how well did you know him before you end up going on this 10-week tour with him?
Yeah. So it's kind of, it's a fascinating relationship, because 15 years older than me makes us, brothers often fight and often are in competition with each other. And I think sometimes that has to do with you're vying for the same resources. And Dave and I, maybe up until now, have not been vying for the same resources. And even now, we don't really vie for them like individually. We're a team that works together in music. So I think that has a large part to do with it. There's three sisters in between us, and our mom died when I was 11 years old. She was sick with cancer. She was diagnosed, and 6 months later, she passed away in hospice care. And I think that those losses, while brutal and traumatic and all of those things, can really stitch together and knit a family together in a new and amazing way. And the relationship that Dave and I had, I really looked up to him, and in a lot of ways idolized him as a kid. And I always yearned for more, because he's 15 years older and he was out on the road when I was really young, and there's just so much space between us, and he was running a business and running a band. and writing songs and doing all these things. And I always wanted more. So I think it's pretty amazing that like if my mom knew that I always wanted more. Our mom knew that man, like she would always kind of, hey Dave, Tim loves Harry Potter. It would be good for you to read. So you guys have a point of, she would kind of like try to stir these things up and stitch us together. And if she could only see us now, I think she'd be so proud that we are as close as you can possibly be. We're best friends. We talk every day. We write songs together. We work together, and we have such an awesome and strong bond. So
That is the parent's dream. I mean, speaking as a parent, I spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of connections your kids are going to have, because you see it with families sometimes where everyone hits 18 years old and they'll get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas every year, but people pretty much go their own ways, especially in this modern world. So it's a real gift that you guys have one another like that.
yeah, it's unbelievable. I cherish it as one of the top, however many, pillars in my life. It's one of the things that I cherish the most and treasure. And we go out of our way to preserve our bond. And, we probably, we just try to like not let the work get in the way of that at all and preserve that at all costs.
How, on a functional and day-to-day level, how do you not let the work get in the way and preserve that? How do you let that relationship remain pristine when with business and with work? I mean, there's contaminants coming in all the time. So how do you keep that pristine on a day-to-day basis?
For sure. Well, I think part of it is, we have, and forgive the pun, it's not really intentional. But we have our North Star is the relationship. And so as that we keep that as the focus, and that's the bottom line. And, there's times when we have awkward conversations of like, hey, whose song is this? Because we legitimately are in a 50-50 deal when it comes to songwriting. And, it comes down to whose kernel or whose spark the song is. Whoever has that initial spark gets to call the shots on where it goes. And I think that that's one of the fundamental rules and one of the things that has kept the temple clean. And there's, like you said about the contaminants, there's plenty of those on the road. There's plenty of those in, from we, and the working songwriter, I think it's such an awesome title because we are at the intersection of art and commerce. And that is a place where you're mixing the spiritual with the profane. And so at this place, especially when we're on the commercial side of things, and that's sort of where we find ourselves right now. We are actually just announced right now today a festival that we're going to put on in our hometown, Philadelphia. And we have the Drive-By Truckers and Kathleen Edwards and Craig Finn and all these people that we really respect and look up to. And it's going to be an awesome thing. And so we're putting on a festival. I just put out my first record, which I'm so thrilled with. And Dave, we're rolling out his next record, which is called Drive It Like It's Stolen. And so we find ourselves now on the commerce sort of side of the coin. And this is where you really have to mind the shop and stay on it and not allow, because, you have to have the appropriate amount of ego in songwriting to think, oh, I have an idea that's worth being heard. Mm-hmm. But then ego is often the enemy of that. So you're in this kind of weird, brackish water where it's, this is art and this is spirit and all these great things. And then it's also commerce.
Well, yeah. And it's, I used to think that commerce was just a necessary evil with the music business. Like, well, you do the commerce so that you can get to make another record. And there is something to that. Just on a nuts and bolts level, you do need the cash to make another record and to support yourself. But I don't know what you found, but I've found going forward, I've actually started to enjoy the commerce part of it because the commerce really dovetails with how the music is actually delivered to people. And I'm talking about the delivery of the artwork that people are going to see on Spotify and see on social media. I'm talking about the packaging that they'll receive it in. I'm talking about the venues that they'll be able to go to and either like the venue or not like the venue to hear the show. All of these are commercial decisions that are really going to affect how people interact with your art. So I've actually kind of grown to love it. Has the commerce part of it grown on you a bit, or do you still find it a necessary evil?
I think that I'm right on the cusp of getting to that point where it's growing on me. I'm right in that area where I'm kind of realizing now with my own record, because the song the way that I've gotten into songwriting has been sort of a cushy um way in. My first blush of songwriting was with Dave, where I could sort of hide behind his name and his enterprise. With it being co-writing, that's how I got into this whole mess. So so I could kind of he was steering the ship for his own music and stuff. So I just put my first record out, and it's called Tim. And, we can probably get into the reasons for that or not if you wish. But I'm right at that point where I'm kind of having the realization that you just described, where it's like, hey, this is all a part of the medium. And the more you embrace that, the more you take ownership of that. And you allow the connective tissue between humans to be all of those things that you just described: the packaging, the venues, the this, the that, the support tours, all of that stuff feeds into it. And you have control, you have a certain amount of control over that. And you kind of have to take that as a treasure and as a joy, and not the necessary evil. Because, we as spiritual beings, we're tapped into this creative life force that,
Yes.
that runs everything. So I think that there is some hesitation with it. And I feel like I'm in the process of breaking through that and getting into this new ground of really enjoying it. So
It's necessary to enjoy it, I think, because when you start to enjoy it, then you start to see the art as much as possible through the eyes of the people who are consuming it. And when you do, you just start to understand more and more that you could play the exact same songs, and if an audience is going to experience them completely differently if you're wearing a leather jacket in a rock club and playing them, or if you're wearing a three-piece suit in a folk club while they're sitting down. They can be the exact same piece of art, but when it's in a different frame, people experience it differently. So I think as you go forward, it's an exciting thing to be inspired by the commerce and the medium of it, because ultimately it is really going to affect how people experience the art itself.
absolutely. And what you said really resonates, because it's funny because, we just sort of both described our troubles with college. But one thing that is coming to my mind right now is something that I learned in a media class and in college at Temple. And it was the media and the medium is the message. And I
Yes.
think that's really vital in what we do, because like you said, if you're wearing the three-piece suit, there's certain tours that you might go on, or certain clubs that you might play, where you go, hey, I'm being put in front of an audience, and if I can facilitate them digesting this and meet them where they are, then they're going to have an easier time meeting the song where it is. So if I have to strap on an electric guitar and make it rock more because it's whatever, I'm open to, I don't know about you, but I'm open to different iterations of the songs that I make up. So I'm fine to play it on an acoustic guitar. I'm fine to play it on an electric guitar. I'm fine to play it with a band or not. And I think that's really awesome. And it can be really useful to facilitate that connection with people.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that book. The book is The Medium is the Message it was a Canadian professor named Marshall McLuhan. I recommend that any artist, whatever your creative pursuit is, if you're in a creative pursuit, reading The Medium is the Message is really going to change the way that you think about things. And it's like we were talking about there, it's partly, how you're dressed, what venue you're in. I've started to think about it even like the literal medium that people are consuming the music on, whether it's Spotify or whether it's YouTube or whether it's vinyl records. I've invested heavily in vinyl records because I think when you go to that medium, you start to draw a different consumer towards you, and you start to signal certain things about your music that are not signaled if people are just listening on YouTube or Spotify. Um, but I'm so glad that you mentioned that, man. It's just such a brilliant piece of work. Everybody should
Yeah.
read it.
Yeah, it's really awesome. And like it's like you said, we can't change the fact that we live in a capitalist society and we need money to make this whole thing happen. So what you can change and you sort of have to change is your perspective on it. And if you can do that, it sort of it can unlock the whole thing. So
Take me a bit backwards. You mentioned this at the start of the interview, but I actually want to dig in on it a little bit more. Take me back to where you described you were a kid, your brother's older than you, 15 years older than you. You idolize him in many ways. You dream of being closer to him. Now all of a sudden you have this opportunity to go on the road with him for 10 weeks in Canada. Compare what you expected out of that tour to the reality of what you met on the ground. And can you kind of explain in granular detail what it was like to go on that first tour?
absolutely. The first impression that I had was this is absolutely insane. And no person in their right mind would ever do this kind of work. This is, I mean, I'm staying up late. I'm getting up early. I'm in the car. All the office hours that people have regular jobs back home, they're spending their 9 to 5 doing their job. I'm spending the 9 to 5 getting to the next club and then beginning the job. And so, everybody has the sort of mist around the stage, the lights, the marquee, all of these things, and all of that is beautiful and special and whatever. And it's kind of, you can be in awe of that, but very rarely do people see the nuts and bolts and the granular detail of what goes into making that show happen. And when you're at the level that we're at, this is such an aptly named podcast because we are working songwriters. And what that means is that you do most of the work on your own. You put a team in place, but that it takes work to get the right team. And then you have to work with that team on a daily basis to make sure that all of these things are ticking and keep on working. And so my first impression was this is mayhem. This is absolute chaos. What is this? I mean, this is awful. And I came in pretty cocky and thought I knew the songs. And at our first rehearsal, Dave is crossing off songs. so I and that lit a fire in me to be like, yeah, there's no way that I'm not going to play on these songs. By the end of this thing, by a weekend, I'm playing on every one of these songs. And so I made that a point to rectify that pretty quick. And I didn't come correct at first. And then I let that first couple of weeks really light that fire. And then everything sort of clicked into focus as I saw Dave and I joke. I'm a big fan of birds, and I saw a bald eagle. We saw a bald eagle out in Vancouver. And that was sort of the tipping point where I went like, oh, man, maybe this thing isn't so bad. This thing is pretty awesome, actually. So that it just kind of there's so much beauty in it and there's so much adventure in it, and it took the change is hard at first and the chaos is hard, and then you learn to be comfortable in that chaos, and everything sort of changes, or at least it did for me.
I mean, definitely it's rad that you saw a bald eagle, but like what on a like in a working way, like from the stage or somewhere in the venue, like can you remember an experience where things began to work for you on that tour where you thought to yourself like, wow, this is it. I could see myself doing this for a living for many years to come.
Yeah, I think just for whatever reason, I started to enjoy the sort of like mundane parts of it. The loading in, the breaking out the guitars, getting them ready, getting the stage ready, taking being methodical about how you set up, having those routines and having those things in place to where you're creating that environment that you feel can make for a special thing that you can share in with other people that are going to be there. That's one of the other things that I don't take lightly, is that I came into this with people at the shows. And that is such a blessing that I really don't take for granted. The fact that when I went out and started playing my first real gigs, there were people at them because of the work that my brother did without me. And then I sort of took it upon myself to go like, I want to be indispensable to this operation. And at first that meant the touring side. And later it meant the creative side and the songwriting side and the business side. And so, yeah, you just sort of learn to take the joy in the everyday. Not everybody gets to do this. And so you're in a privileged position to be able to have the ability and means to do it. And I just sort of started taking joy in those mundane sort of things. Oh, how do you wrap up your cables? What's the technique that you use? I mean, all those things, you get good at them, and then it's fun to do things that you are good at, fun to see it all come together. And yeah, I don't know. It's a wild thing that we do, and it's a really cool thing to do. And I think the perspective of, hey, not everybody gets to do it is a guiding light. We come from a very blue collar town in Philadelphia, where many of our friends are plumbers and electricians and contractors and all those kind of things. And those are all amazing jobs, but they're also jobs that many of those friends are like, man, I can't believe you get to do what you get to do. And so that is a guiding light. And a thing that we don't take lightly.
Especially if you're a singer-songwriter that makes your living touring, you are in this kind of weird in-between space between like kind of white-collar creative work and blue-collar work. Because there is a blue-collar aspect to it of like, I show up at a gig and I have my case, and my guitar case is just filled with all these different tools from over the last 15 years. Different things have gone wrong. And so I now have a tool in my case to be able to fix that problem in real time at the gig so that the show can go on. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so great. And it's been kind of cool because now that I've gotten out onto my own, like my first gig that I played as Tim Hause was with Tall Tall Trees, and it was a gig out in Lancaster at this place Tellus 360. And I came, I did my sound check, blah 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 blah, and if I was green, it would have been mayhem, because I got up to play the gig and my guitar, something went, I think my pickup or the preamp in the guitar went bad. And if I was green, I would have panicked. But I've done this so many times that I quickly assessed like, hey, this is not going to change. So I took 10 seconds to troubleshoot two things. Neither of those things worked. I unplugged the guitar, ran out into the crowd, and did it completely unplugged, and it made for like a really magical connective thing with the crowd that night that wouldn't have happened had I been green. I would have probably panicked. There would have been dead air, and it wouldn't have been as cool as it ended up being, just because I had that experience. So yeah, like you said, it's like you have all these tools that you compile over the years, and you kind of know what to look out for, and you can head off some of those problems at the pass.
Are you stuck in a rut? Are you tired of listening to that Jimmy Buffett 20th Century Masters CD over and over again and need some new music? Are you sick of making hamburger helper beef stroganoff for dinner every night and you want something new to cook? What you are looking for, my friends, is the Enthusiast Digest. That's my monthly newsletter, which arrives in your inbox the first Sunday morning of every month, bursting with musical recommendations, poetry selections, recipes and cooking techniques for my favorite dishes, and items of general interest culled from the vast cesspool that is the internet. The Enthusiast Digest is free to subscribe to. If you dig the poetry that you hear on this show and the artists that you're hearing from, you'll dig the newsletter because I approach it with the exact same sensibility of curation. Go to joepugmusic.com/newsletter today to sign up for free. That is joepugmusic.com/newsletter. It takes approximately 15 seconds to sign up for a free newsletter that will enrich the first Sunday of your month with a veritable cornucopia of new and delightful recommendations. That's the Enthusiast Digest, the first Sunday of every month. Sign up for free at joepugmusic.com/newsletter. Tim's debut album is a new artistic beginning, and all new beginnings have a potential, both for adulation, but also for judgment, and that's a risk. There's a wonderful poem by Connie Waynick that speaks to that two-sided coin. It's entitled, First House. We bought a house made of mud and straw. Thieves stole my sewing machine and my turquoise ring. They stole your music and the needle you lowered with one steady finger. To lose these things, I learned. We had a little girl, and I never let her out of my arms. Summer nights, we sat on a moon-striped back porch. Later, I hung out laundry in the snow, glorious whites. Clothespins clung to the wire. A flock of house finches, breasts to the sun. Like a needle, we rode the world as it spun, working our way to the center, song by song. Talk to me a bit about the songwriting end of it and the creative end of it. When you first started writing with Dave, with your brother, what did you have to learn at first to be able to come up to that level and write with him?
Yeah, I think part of it is any good writer can write from different perspectives. So I think, we're all sort of like amateur psychologists when we do this, because you sort of have to have an antenna up to everyday life and be watching out and listening for certain things that you could sort of put that in your cap for later. And so you're sort of like, it's a perspective change where you're sort of always foraging for new ideas, new thoughts, new ways to say things. And so I think with Dave, it really was beneficial because I started off as a fan first and I knew his voice. And as brothers, there's a certain DNA that we share. I mean, and that's a huge part of it. We sharing that DNA, knowing his voice, and then I think that it really made me a better writer because I have to write in somebody else's voice, but it's sort of similar to my own. So I think it gave me insight into how to find my own voice going forward. And, at first it started as just a few songs on a record. And then the next record was 50-50. And the next record was Kick. I started with Bury Me in Philly. I actually had one of the so the single was The Flinch from that record. And that chorus, I Ain't Flinching Anymore, was something that I had in my notebook. So that really propelled me forward because I go like, hey, this is my first time really songwriting for real. And here it is. This is the single. Like my brother's using this line as the single. So that kind of gave a huge boost of confidence. And then by the next record, everything was 50-50. And sort of, I had this other watershed moment on the next record. And, it's like everything's 50-50 and that's amazing. I'm really excited about that. I'm proud of that, all these things. But I also gave up a song that for the first time, I was really unsure if I should give it up. And that song was The Ditch. I came back from the train from work one day. I cut my teeth in restaurants. So I'm coming back from the train from work And I had the line, if I can't make it out of this ditch, I better make a home of it. And I was in a really tumultuous time period right then and there. And that line really felt like it summed up my perspective. And so to sort of give that up to our operation that doesn't have my name at the top of the marquee or whatever, that was sort of a watershed moment. I'm so glad that I did. And all these years later, that was huge. That was clutch. And I think, it's better to not have the scarcity mentality when it comes to creativity. You never have written your best song. And even if you have, I think it's not good to have the perspective that you have. So always around the next bend could be your best song. And so I've tried to maintain that. And I think part of writing with someone else and writing with a partner and writing with an established guy who's further down the road has helped instill that in me, that, hey, this is an abundance mentality. Like there's a wellspring within us, and there's a creative life force and a creative consciousness that is sort of like a river that we can all tap into. And if you can kind of keep your pole in the river, you never know when a fish might grab a hold of the line, and you never know when it might be a real whopper. So
Yes, yes. And if you're more concerned with, to continue with your analogy, if you're more concerned with, staying on the side of the river and sitting on top of the cooler where your other fish from back in the day you pulled out are to guard them, then your pole's not going to be in the river, and you're not going to be pulling new sustenance out of it. I think you're so right about approaching creativity with that abundance mentality rather than the scarcity mentality. I always try to remind myself, if I have a song that I've just written that I think is good and valuable, I always just try to remind myself, 15 minutes ago, this thing didn't exist at all, and then it just came into the world like magic. It like a child being born, but almost more, not more impressive than a child being born, but more unexpected than a child being born. When a child's born, you have 9 months to conceptualize the fact that there's a baby on the way. When a song appears, you woke up that morning, you ate breakfast, the song wasn't there, and by the time lunch was done, this new song is just there. It's a new part. It's a new friend. It's a new piece of property. It's a new asset for your business. I mean, it's this wonderful, magical thing that if you don't have that abundance mindset, you're just not going to get many of them.
yeah, I think so. I think so. And that's sort of one of the things that writing with somebody else has taught me. And the other thing that I think I really learned with my sort of unique, I kind of uniquely fell down a flight of steps of nepotism into this whole thing. Like I think nepotism can put your foot in the door, but the hard work and the ability and the perseverance is what opens the door and allows you to walk through it and continue a life in something that's creative. I've been on the road for about 10 years, and I've seen the rate of attrition is high. And so, while nepotism might be a part of the way that I got started, I don't think it necessarily applies at this point. And, that abundance, the other thing that you learn also with somebody who's further ahead is to finish the song. The finishing of the song is not easy. And I had so many ideas that sat idle, because when it isn't a fully fleshed idea, you can sort of give yourself an out. You can sort of say, well, what if, it could be a hit or it could be not. And you don't know if you don't finish it. And I think that there's some comfort that we can take in not finishing it, because you go, well, it's kind of cozy back here in this unfinished. It's kind of cozy to think I've got these ideas up on the board and they're not finished. And woo, what could they be? And so finishing it is really awesome, and it's a vital part of the process. And working with someone else is a great way for us to each finish each other's songs. And it took us really getting into a disciplined headspace. I'm I'm proud of this. We were halfway through the pandemic, and it occurred to me, this pandemic is awful, but it's given us a lot of time, and we haven't come up with any songs yet. And it sort of dawned on me, and I'm like, man, we gotta fix this. And it was at the end of December. We got into January, and I said, look, let's go into January with the intention of we'll meet every day, Monday through Friday. For Pencils Down Friday, you have to have a verse chorus at least of a song, each of us, that we turn in and critique each other on. And we meet on Zoom every day, Monday through Friday, and work on these two songs. And then we on Friday present them. Each of us listens to them. We start, we talk through them, we work through them. And then we sort of developed this over the course of like 2 months. You end up with 8 songs each. And that would go on to become Blood Harmony and Tim, my record. And so it's really, that discipline is important, and it's the discipline you can it's easier, I think, to hold each other accountable than sometimes it is to hold yourself accountable. So I think it's really awesome to have, for anybody who might be stuck out there, go try to work on something with somebody you trust and whose ideas that, whose ideas and friendship and whatever you value, because it could really help you along in the finishing of the song.
It sounds like you're talking about both discipline there and also a willingness to be vulnerable, because when you finish a song, you open yourself up to not only the possibility, but the likelihood of the song failing in one way or another. Very few of us are going to get perfect songs out in our lifetime. So every song that's finished is going to fail in its own particular way. An unfinished song can't fail at all. And then you can't fail either, right? And so it is, I know what you mean. Like it can be almost comforting to sit in that space like, oh man, I got this good nugget for a song. Imagine when I finish this, how good it's going to be. Then you can hold on to that for a couple months and, sit back, drink a beer by yourself and just admire this completely useless like virgin of a song, basically. You know what I mean? Like just it can't produce anything when it's not finished. So I think that's beautiful, the way that you're talking about the ability to just finish it, even though you make yourself vulnerable to having your perfect idea defiled by the real world and by reality and by the constraints that you come up against by trying to make an idea come into the world as a piece of art.
Totally.
When did you know that part of those songs were not going to be part of Dave's project, but your own project, Tim?
So yeah, when The Ditch went on Kick, that was sort of the moment wherein I went, okay, you know what? That was awesome, because The Ditch ended up being one of the songs that remains in our set list. I think every record is its own journey. At least for us, it's usually a complete thought, and it's a snapshot of where you are in that moment. And so and we're always on to the next thing. So over the years and over the records, there's a few that stick out above the rest that really encapsulate the entirety of the record. And those things are the ones that make it onto the set list long term. And, sometimes they're the most played ones, sometimes they aren't. In the case of The Ditch, it was one of the more played ones. It was one of the ones that we really spotlighted, and it remains in our set to this day. But going through that process of, wow, this really feels like me. This really feels raw. This is like, even though it's my brother singing it, there's a difficulty in watching someone else. And even though I'm singing along with them, there's a difficulty in watching someone else deliver that line that really it spoke so much to me at that time. So I began to sort of, in my own brain, separate things out and start weeding things out and go like, this one is really me. This is really uniquely my perspective. And, my take on songwriting is, walking in other people's shoes is how you learn to connect with them. Like I said about the restaurant industry, I cut my teeth in that industry. And I think a big part of being a good server or bartender or whatever is being a good diner or drinker at the bar. And you figure out what is good and what's annoying about, bad service. And then you can peel back from that and go, all right, well, then I know what I'm not going to do and what I should do. And, the whole sort of lost my train of thought here, but
I do agree with you. I think that kind of goes back to what we were saying earlier about the commerce part of it and thinking about it through the eyes of the consumer of the music. It's the same with, obviously, you were talking about the restaurant industry. It's obviously the same as a songwriter. Like, if you don't consume songs that you love, how are you going to know what's good? I've mentioned this on the podcast before, but there's a writer named Annie Dillard. The way she describes your own voice is if you're reading, let's say you're reading a Hemingway novel or John Dos Passos novel, someone that you love them as a writer, and you're reading it and you're enjoying it, and you come to one sentence that they wrote that you're like, I don't really, that's kind of a weird way to put that, or I don't like that. Well, that right there is your voice,
right.
And you only learn it by being a consumer of the work of others and knowing what you like, knowing what you dislike. It would be completely alien to try to make music if you weren't also a consumer of music
Right.
as well.
Right. And you know what? I think the songs that always speak to me are songs that were taken from some one guy's or gal's unique experience, life experience, right? So that you can tell that they have a singular voice, but then somehow it's universal and evergreen in a way that anybody could relate to it. So I think of like a Tom Petty as one of the guys that comes first to my mind as someone who can write simple stuff, but has a very unique voice and a very unique point of view. But somehow such a unique and specific voice can be applied on this grand level and on this universal scale where so many people can apply their own, thoughts to it and their own meaning and derive such meaning from it.
Especially when Mike Campbell's guitar is chiming away in the background. Can make you feel that way. So what has been the most challenging part of stepping out on your own with this new record, where you think to yourself like, dang, that's a little bit easier in my project with Dave. This is kind of a pain in the ass. Like, are there any things that you're having to do now that you look at your brother and you say to yourself, damn, I didn't know you were having to do that this whole time?
Yeah, there's so many, to be honest. I have such a new and greater appreciation for what he has built and the world that we sort of live in based on so much of his hard work before I showed up. And the thing that I'm struggling with at the moment is it was a big deal for me to make my first record. I knew that I needed to make my first record. And I'm so proud of what we came up with. I think it's a really great record. There's a lot about it that's great. And, but, there's this other part of it where it's like, I need to be heard. And this needs to be heard. And how do I get it to be heard, even though I already have some semblance of a platform based on this work that I've done in this other realm? And how do I get it to be heard? And, I'm actually going through. So right now I named the first record Tim because it's very uniquely my story. I think I deal with a lot of the pillars in my life and I go through them, and I hope that they are presented in this kind of universal fashion, like we were just talking about. But I think that I went a little bit too far out of my way in divorcing myself from Dave. And honestly, I think the mistake I made was I wanted to make my artist name Tim. And I thought that was kind of a cute thing. Like, oh, it's such a simple name, but it's sort of grandiose at the same time. I'll put it in all caps and it has like sort of a cool look to it and all these kind of things. And I'm actually in the process of changing my artist name from Tim to Tim Hause. And I think that, I'm a little sheepish to say that this is going on. I'm a little like, I wish I would have just thought of this before. But sometimes you don't know until you do. And that's sort of how it's gone for me. And I'm at this point of like, why would I, I've done such great work. This is a name that I should, the other just crass reason that I didn't want to attach our last name is so many people mispronounce it and they say it's House or what, or Hause or whatever. So it's Hause. And I always, it's annoying when people can't get it right, when somebody announces us at a show or at a festival or whatever. And they say Dave House and the Mermaid, I'm a little bit like, every time. And there's a grumble whenever that happens and sort of a chuckle when that happens. And so I was sort of trying to get away from that. But what I've learned is it's making it more difficult for people. Like the specificity of my last name is a thing that can lead people more easily to the work that I'm doing. Yes. So, and sort of that realization has prompted me to go, you know what, I am going to make the left turn. If there's any point that I'm going to do it, it's better that I do it now than 5 years down the line when there's X amount more records and all this kind of X amount more songs. So I'm actually in the process of doing that right now and becoming Tim Hause, a guy that I've always been just since the day that I was born. But
oh man, well, we're so glad that you have become Tim Hause. Congratulations on the new record, and thanks for being a part of the Working Songwriter.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. It's an honor and a privilege. I'm a big fan, and so it's such a thrill to be on here with you and talk to you.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Tim's latest album is self-titled, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.